Madam F, there's a journalist asking questions about the eatery, she said hesitantly. F froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. A journalist? Why? I don't know, but she's been talking to customers and taking notes. F brushed it off, but a seed of doubt had been planted. That afternoon, Amara, a young journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption, arrived at the eatery. She ordered a plate of jollof rice and ate quietly, her sharp eyes scanning the room. F greeted her warmly. What F didn't know was that her life was about to change forever. The sun rose lazily over the vast stretch of farmland in Edo State, casting a golden hue over the thatched roof homes of a quiet village. A young F sat cross-legged on the cool, red earth, her eyes fixed on the steady hands of her grandmother, Mama Isoken. The elderly woman, with her graying hair tied back in a simple cloth, moved with the precision of a craftsman. She stirred a bubbling pot of bunga soup, the steam carrying the rich aroma of palm nuts, smoked fish, and a delicate balance of spices. Good food is a gift, Mama Isoken said, her voice firm but kind. She paused, looking at F. But a clean kitchen is the foundation. You cannot serve love in a dirty dish. F nodded absently, her gaze shifting to the small pile of spices by her grandmother's side. She wasn't interested in the tedious chore of washing pots or cleaning the clay fireplace. What fascinated her was the magic that transformed these raw ingredients into meals that made people's faces light up. Her favorite moments were when neighbors gathered around, bowls in hand, ready to taste her grandmother's cooking. The compliments came in waves, and F basked in the reflected glory. At just 8 years old, F had already mastered the art of grinding pepper with a stone and blending spices for soups. Her hands were small but skilled, and she delighted in tasting her creations. Still, Mama Isoken's emphasis on cleanliness often felt unnecessary. Grandma, no one will care if the pot isn't shiny. They'll care about how the food tastes, F said one afternoon as she chopped vegetables. Mama Isoken chuckled softly but didn't argue. She knew that lessons, like seeds, needed time to grow. Years passed, and F grew into a young woman with dreams that stretched beyond her small village. Her grandmother's passing left a void in her heart, but it also gave her a newfound determination. F wanted to take the culinary lessons she had learned and turn them into something big. She dreamed of moving to the bustling city of Benin, where her cooking could reach more than just her neighbors. Her journey began humbly. With a small bundle of clothes and a handful of naira tied in a cloth, F boarded a rickety bus to the city. The ride was long, the roads bumpy, but her excitement overshadowed the discomfort. The bustling streets of Benin welcomed her with a cacophony of honking cars, the chatter of traders, and the tantalizing smell of street food. F rented a tiny room in a crowded compound. It was barely big enough for a mattress and a small gas stove, but to her, it was a palace. She wasted no time in getting to work. With a borrowed pot and a few basic ingredients, she began cooking simple meals, jollof rice, pepper soup, and yam porridge, and selling them to factory workers during their lunch breaks. At first, business was slow. Workers were skeptical of the new girl with no signage or reputation. But word spread quickly. You need to try her pepper soup, one man told his colleagues after his first meal. It tastes like something my mother would make. F's savings grew, and within 2 years, she was able to rent a small shop on a busy street. The shop was modest, with peeling paint on the walls and mismatched furniture, but it had potential. F poured her heart into the space, scrubbing the floors until they shone and arranging the tables with a welcoming touch. She painted a sign herself, F's Eatery, in bold red letters. The eatery opened on a sunny Monday morning. F wore her brightest dress, a yellow Ankara print, and greeted her first customers with a smile that masked her nervousness. The menu was simple: jollof rice, bunga soup, and fried plantains. It wasn't long before the space filled with chatter and laughter, the clinking of plates blending with the sounds of the bustling street outside. F's charm was as much a draw as her food. She greeted every customer like an old friend, learning their names and remembering their favorite orders. "Auntie, you're glowing today," she said to one woman who frequented the eatery after work. The woman blushed, clearly delighted. Her meals were affordable but packed with flavor. Customers praised the richness of her soups and the perfectly balanced spices in her rice. "F, your jollof rice tastes like celebration," one man exclaimed, earning a laugh from the other diners. The eatery quickly became a neighborhood staple, with workers, students, and traders lining up during lunch breaks. By the end of her first year, F's eatery was a hive of activity. The aroma of frying oil, sizzling meat, and freshly cooked rice drifted out of the shop, enticing passers-by. The mismatched tables were always full, and customers sometimes waited outside for a spot to open up. F's small team consisted of herself and Ruth, a shy but hardworking young woman from a nearby compound. Ruth admired F's energy and dedication but often felt uneasy about the state of the kitchen. The stove was covered in layers of grease, the sink was perpetually clogged, and utensils were reused without being washed thoroughly. Ruth suggested hiring a cleaner, but F waved her off. "People come here for the taste," F said with a laugh. "Not for a clean kitchen." Her confidence seemed justified. Customers rarely complained, and the eatery's popularity continued to grow. Birthdays were celebrated there, business deals were sealed over bowls of pepper soup, and even a few marriage proposals took place at the corner table. F thrived on the energy of her eatery. She loved moving between tables, chatting with customers, and watching their faces light up as they ate. But behind her cheerful demeanor, cracks were beginning to form. One evening, as F and Ruth cleaned up after a busy day, Ruth hesitated before speaking. "Madam F, I think we should start cleaning more often. The stove is getting very dirty." F sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ruth, you worry too much. The fire kills everything. Besides, customers love the food, so there's no problem." Ruth didn't argue, but her unease grew. She noticed that the refrigerator, a second-hand unit F had bought months ago, wasn't keeping food as cold as it should. Flies buzzed around containers of spices, and the pile of dirty utensils seemed to grow by the day. Still, F's confidence was unshakable. She believed her talent in the kitchen was enough to outweigh any shortcomings. By the third year, F's eatery had become more than just a restaurant, it was a cultural hub. Families gathered there after church on Sundays, students celebrated exam results with plates of rice and plantains, and travelers made detours just to taste her famous nkwobi. F was no longer just a cook, she was a local celebrity. Yet, the lessons Mama Isoken had tried to teach her all those years ago lingered in the shadows. "A clean kitchen is the foundation," her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind whenever Ruth brought up concerns. But F pushed those thoughts aside. As long as her customers were happy, she saw no need to change. The morning light filtered through the narrow streets of Benin City, reflecting off the colorful stalls of traders setting up shop for the day. F's eatery, tucked between a cobbler's stand and a fruit vendor, came alive as the familiar aroma of frying plantains wafted through the air. The clatter of pots and pans mixed with the hum of the city, drawing passers-by like moths to a flame. Inside, F moved briskly, her vibrant Ankara apron tied tightly around her waist. Her laughter rang out as she chatted with customers lining up for their morning meals. The eatery was as vibrant as ever, a hub of activity and joy. But behind the lively facade, Ruth stood quietly, her eyes scanning the cluttered kitchen. The refrigerator groaned as it struggled to keep its contents cool. Flies buzzed lazily around a bowl of chopped vegetables, and a stack of used plates teetered precariously on the edge of the counter. Ruth's lips tightened as she wiped her hands on her apron. She had cleaned that counter just yesterday, yet it looked as though it hadn't been touched in weeks. "Madam F," Ruth called hesitantly, her voice barely cutting through the din, "Should I throw out this leftover soup? It's been here since yesterday." F waved her off without turning. "No need, Ruth. It's still good. Heat it up properly, and it will be fine." Ruth frowned but didn't argue. She had learned long ago that F's confidence in her cooking was unshakable. Ruth admired her boss's skill and charisma, but she couldn't ignore the growing unease that settled in her stomach each time she stepped into the kitchen. By the middle of its third year, F's Eatery had become more than just a restaurant. It was a cultural landmark. People didn't just come for the food, they came for the atmosphere, the sense of community, and the charm of F herself. Workers stopped by after long shifts, students gathered to celebrate exam results, and even couples came to enjoy quiet meals at the corner tables. F basked in the praise, her heart swelling with pride each time a customer called her a genius or compared her jollof rice to that of a five-star hotel. Her eatery was more than she had ever dreamed it could be, and she was determined to keep it thriving. But with success came complacency. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, had become a place of shortcuts and compromises. F saw these as necessary sacrifices to keep up with the growing demand. After all, no one complained about the taste of her food, and that, she believed, was all that mattered. Ruth, however, saw things differently. She noticed the small cracks that others overlooked, the refrigerator that barely worked, the stove covered in layers of grease, the pile of dirty utensils that seemed to grow taller with each passing day. She tried to bring these issues to F's attention, but her concerns were often met with laughter. "Ruth, you worry too much," F said one evening as they cleaned up after a particularly busy day. "The fire kills everything. As long as the food tastes good, people won't care about a few dirty pots." "But, madam, what if someone gets sick?" Ruth pressed cautiously. "What if?" "No one will get sick," F interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "Trust me, Ruth. I know what I'm doing." Ruth nodded reluctantly, but the unease in her chest remained. For a time, F's confidence seemed justified. The eatery continued to thrive, its tables always full and its reputation growing by the day. But beneath the surface, whispers of doubt began to spread. At first, it was just the occasional complaint, a trader grumbling about an upset stomach, a student mentioning a strange aftertaste in the soup. These murmurs were easy to dismiss, lost in the sea of praise that surrounded F's cooking. But as the weeks turned into months, the whispers grew louder. "She's always in a hurry," one regular customer remarked to a friend over a plate of nkwobi. "Have you ever seen her wash her hands?" "Maybe it's the weather," another customer replied, stirring his pepper soup absent-mindedly. "You know how this city can be." But the doubts lingered. Ruth overheard these conversations and felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She began to notice patterns, customers who frequented the eatery complaining of similar symptoms, dishes that didn't seem as fresh as they once were, small mistakes that F brushed off as insignificant. One afternoon, Ruth summoned the courage to confront F again. "Madam, I really think we should clean more often. The stove is—" "Ruth, please," F said, cutting her off with a wave of her hand. "Do you know how many people come here every day? If there was a problem, don't you think they'd stop coming?" "But—" "No buts," F said firmly. "The customers love the food. That's all that matters." Ruth bit her tongue, but her worry only grew. The turning point came on a particularly hot afternoon. The eatery was busier than usual, with customers crowding the tables and forming a line that stretched out the door. F moved quickly, her hands a blur as she dished out steaming plates of jollof rice and fried plantains. Ruth worked alongside her, her movements slower but just as diligent. As she reached for a pot of soup that had been reheated multiple times, a strange smell wafted up to her nose. She hesitated, glancing at F, who was too busy chatting with a customer to notice. "Madam, I think this soup has gone bad," Ruth whispered. Nonsense, F said without looking. Just add more pepper. No one will notice. Ruth's heart sank, but she did as she was told. The pot was emptied into bowls and served to unsuspecting customers, who ate without complaint. But Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A week later, a trader who often stopped by for lunch approached Ruth as she swept the floor. "That soup I had last week," he said, his tone accusatory. "It made me sick." Ruth froze, her grip tightening on the broom handle. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said carefully. "Have you spoken to Madame F.?" The trader shook his head. "I didn't want to cause trouble. But you should tell her to be careful. People talk, you know." Ruth nodded, her chest tightening. She wanted to tell F, but she knew how her boss would react. Instead, she kept quiet, hoping it was an isolated incident. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, similar complaints trickled in, whispered quietly to Ruth or shared between customers at the tables. Ruth tried to raise the issue with F again, but her concerns were met with the same dismissive confidence. "Ruth, people love my food," F said one evening as they closed up shop. "Do you know how many people eat here every day? If my food was a problem, don't you think they'd stop coming?" Ruth wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. F's belief in her cooking was unshakable, and her success had made her blind to the growing cracks in her foundation. As the weeks passed, the whispers of doubt grew louder, and Ruth's unease turned into dread. She began to notice small but troubling patterns: leftovers being reheated one too many times, ingredients stored carelessly, utensils reused without being properly cleaned. The kitchen, once a place of pride, had become a ticking time bomb. F, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. Her confidence in her cooking had carried her this far, and she saw no reason to change. But Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. And she was right. The storm was coming, and it would shake the very foundation of F's empire. The sun had barely risen over Benin City when Ruth arrived at F's eatery one morning, a sense of dread tightening her chest. The usually lively streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a generator and the distant bark of a dog. The silence was unnerving, but Ruth brushed it off, attributing her unease to the heatwave that had swept through the city. She pushed open the door to the eatery, her eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. F was already there, her sleeves rolled up as she stirred a pot of soup. The scent of frying oil and sizzling spices filled the air, a comforting reminder of the eatery's usual vibrancy. But Ruth's comfort was short-lived. "Madame F, there's a journalist asking questions about the eatery," Ruth said, her voice hesitant. F froze mid-stir, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "A journalist? Why?" "I don't know, but she's been talking to customers and taking notes," Ruth replied, wringing her hands. F laughed, though it sounded forced. "Ruth, you worry too much. It's probably nothing. Maybe she just wants to write about my food." But Ruth's expression didn't change. The unease she felt had been growing for weeks, and now it seemed to coil tighter around her. Still, F dismissed her concerns, brushing them aside like she had so many times before. That afternoon, the eatery was busier than usual. The line of customers stretched out the door, their chatter blending with the sound of sizzling oil and clattering plates. F moved between the kitchen and the dining area with practiced ease, her wide smile and warm demeanor masking the exhaustion that threatened to creep in. Among the crowd sat Amara, a young journalist with sharp eyes and a reputation for uncovering the truth. She had been hearing whispers about F's eatery for weeks, rumors of unsanitary practices, stomach illnesses, and a kitchen that didn't match the quality of the food it produced. Intrigued, she decided to see for herself. Amara ordered a plate of jollof rice and ate quietly, her eyes scanning the room. She noticed the mismatched furniture, the faded paint on the walls, and the warmth with which F greeted her customers. The food was delicious, as everyone had said, but Amara couldn't ignore the subtle signs of neglect. A cobweb in the corner, a faint smell of something sour wafting from the kitchen, small details that most people would overlook. When F approached her table, Amara smiled warmly. "Your food is as good as they say," she said, her tone light. F beamed. "Thank you. That's what we aim for here." But what F didn't know was that her life was about to change forever. Over the next few days, Amara returned to the eatery, blending in with the crowd as she quietly observed. She noticed the patterns Ruth had seen but dared not speak about, the stack of dirty utensils on the counter, the refrigerator that hummed ominously, and the reused pots that never seemed to see soap. Amara's journalist instincts kicked in. She began asking subtle questions, engaging customers in casual conversation to gauge their experiences. Most were glowing in their praise, but a few mentioned stomach issues they hadn't initially linked to the eatery. "I thought it was just something I ate the night before," one man said. "But now that you mention it, it happens every time I eat here." Armed with this information, Amara decided to dig deeper. One morning, she arrived at the eatery before it opened, positioning herself near the back entrance. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and she peered inside, her heart pounding. What she saw made her stomach churn. F stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup with a large spoon. The utensil's edges were blackened from years of use, and Amara watched in shock as F scratched her armpit with the same spoon before returning it to the pot. Nearby, Ruth worked silently, her movements tense as she chopped vegetables on a cutting board stained with the remnants of previous meals. Amara pulled out her phone, recording the scene as discreetly as she could. Her hands trembled as she captured footage of F rinsing a knife in a murky basin of water before using it to slice raw meat. The smell of sour food and stale oil wafted from the kitchen, making Amara's stomach twist. She knew she couldn't confront F directly, not yet. Instead, she quietly slipped away, her mind racing. What she had witnessed was more than just neglect, it was a blatant disregard for the trust her customers had placed in her. Amara felt a mix of anger and sadness. She had come hoping to uncover the truth, but what she found was worse than she had imagined. That evening, Amara sat in her small apartment, reviewing the footage she had captured. The evidence was damning: unsanitary practices, neglected cleaning, and a general lack of care for basic hygiene. But Amara hesitated. She knew that publishing this story would destroy F's reputation and possibly her livelihood. Was it worth it? Her thoughts turned to the customers she had spoken to, the ones who had suffered stomach issues, the ones who trusted F without question. Amara knew she had a responsibility to them, even if it meant facing backlash. Over the next few days, Amara continued gathering evidence. She interviewed customers who had fallen ill after eating at the eatery, carefully piecing together their stories. Some were reluctant to speak, unwilling to tarnish the reputation of a place they loved. But others, emboldened by Amara's determination, shared their experiences openly. "It's always the soup," one woman said. "It tastes good, but every time I eat it, I feel sick afterward." Amara compiled these accounts, pairing them with the footage she had gathered. She knew the time had come to tell the story. On a crisp Thursday morning, Amara's article went live. Titled "The Dirty Secrets Behind F's Eatery," it detailed the unsanitary practices she had witnessed and included interviews with affected customers. Accompanied by photos and videos, the piece painted a stark picture of a beloved eatery hiding a troubling reality. The response was immediate. By noon, the article had gone viral, shared across social media and discussed in WhatsApp groups throughout the city. Customers were shocked, their fond memories of F's food clashing with the harsh truths revealed in the exposé. "Ah, I can't believe this," one woman said as she scrolled through the article. "I eat there every week. No wonder I've been having stomach pains," another man muttered. "This is unacceptable." The backlash was swift. Customers stopped coming, and the once busy eatery grew eerily quiet. Ruth, unable to face the growing tension, packed her belongings and left, leaving a short note for F. "I'm sorry, madam. I can't stay." F first heard about the exposé from a customer who showed her the article on their phone. Her heart sank as she read the headline, her hands trembling. Each word felt like a dagger, and the accompanying photos and videos left no room for denial. By the end of the day, the eatery was empty. Suppliers called to cancel orders, and even F's most loyal customers stayed away. The laughter and chatter that had once filled the space were replaced by an oppressive silence. F sat alone at one of the tables, staring at her phone. She felt a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. How could this happen? She had always believed her food was enough to shield her from criticism, but now that belief felt hollow. Ruth's departure was the final blow. Without her assistant, F was left to face the fallout alone. For the first time, she began to question the choices she had made, the shortcuts she had taken, and the warnings she had ignored. The exposé sparked a city-wide conversation about food safety, with health inspectors launching surprise visits to eateries across Benin City. Many vendors were shut down, their practices exposed in the wake of F's scandal. But for F, the fallout was deeply personal. She had lost everything: her customers, her reputation, and her sense of purpose. Yet, amidst the darkness, a small flicker of hope remained. F knew she had two choices: give up or fight to rebuild. And in the quiet of her empty eatery, she resolved to take the first steps toward redemption. The laughter of children echoed faintly through the narrow alleyway, blending with the distant hum of traffic in Benin City. But inside F's tiny apartment, there was only silence. It was a suffocating kind of stillness, broken only by the occasional clatter of plates from her neighbor's kitchen. F sat on the edge of her bed, her shoulders slumped and her hands clasped tightly together. The light streaming through the single window illuminated her tired face, etched with lines of worry and regret. Her phone lay on the table beside her, its screen dark. No calls, no messages. Not anymore. The exposé had torn through her life like a hurricane, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The eatery, once a bustling hub of activity, now stood abandoned. The colorful sign that had once proudly displayed her name was now a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the words of the article scrolling across her mind, the dirty secrets behind F's eatery. The first week after the exposé was the hardest. F barely left her apartment, too ashamed to face the outside world. She avoided the market, where she knew the traders would gossip about her, and she ignored the knocks at her door, unwilling to hear the pity or judgment in their voices. Ruth's departure hit her particularly hard. Though she had often dismissed her assistant's concerns, Ruth's steady presence had been a source of comfort in the chaotic world of the eatery. Now, without her, the silence in F's life felt even louder. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, F finally opened her fridge to make a meal. The sour stench of spoiled food hit her immediately, forcing her to step back. She covered her nose and quickly shut the door, her stomach twisting. It was a small but painful reminder of how far she had fallen. As she sat back down, her thoughts drifted to her grandmother. Mama Isokan's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from years ago: good food is a gift, but a clean kitchen is the foundation. F clenched her fists, the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her chest. She had ignored that lesson, dismissed it as unnecessary, and now she was paying the price. The fallout from the exposé extended far beyond F's personal struggles. Her story had sparked a citywide conversation about food safety, with many questioning the practices of their favorite vendors. Health inspectors became a common sight in the markets and along the busy streets, shutting down eateries that failed to meet standards. Some vendors viewed F's downfall as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what could happen when corners were cut. Others, however, resented her, blaming her for the increased scrutiny on their businesses. "She ruined it for all of us," one vendor muttered to a colleague. Now everyone thinks we're dirty. In the community, opinions about F were divided. Some sympathized with her, arguing that she had simply made mistakes. Others were less forgiving, seeing her as a symbol of carelessness and betrayal. She fed us, yes, a trader said during a heated debate at the market. But at what cost? My children were sick because of her food. Let's not act like we didn't know, another replied. We saw the grease on her stove, the flies in her kitchen. We ignored it because the food was good. The conversations were endless, and F's name became synonymous with scandal. But amidst the criticism, there were whispers of hope. A few customers expressed a desire to see her return, to see her learn from her mistakes and rebuild. One evening, as F sat by her window staring at the bustling street below, a small flyer fluttered in on the breeze. She picked it up, her brows furrowing as she read the bold print, "Free Food Safety Training, Enroll Now." The details listed an address and a contact number, promising a comprehensive course on hygiene, kitchen organization, and customer trust. F's first instinct was to toss the flyer aside. The thought of stepping into a classroom, surrounded by strangers who might recognize her name, filled her with dread. But as she turned the paper over in her hands, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Perhaps this was a chance to start over. The next morning, she stood outside the training center, her heart pounding. The building was modest, with peeling paint and a faded sign above the door. F hesitated, the urge to turn around and leave pulling at her. But she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The classroom was small and crowded, filled with people from all walks of life. Some were young and eager, their notebooks already open and pens poised. Others, like F, carried a weariness that spoke of experience and regret. The instructor, a no-nonsense woman named Mama Grace, began the session with a warm but firm introduction. "Welcome," she said, her voice commanding but kind. "You're here because you want to be better. Because you know there's more to serving food than just taste. Hygiene is trust, and trust is everything." F listened intently, her hands gripping the edges of her notebook. The lessons were practical and straightforward, but they also felt like a mirror reflecting her past mistakes. Mama Grace demonstrated proper cleaning techniques, emphasized the importance of storage temperatures, and shared tips on maintaining a spotless workspace even during busy hours. For F, the sessions were both enlightening and humbling. She realized how many basic principles she had ignored, how much she had taken for granted. The other students were quick to pick up on her struggles, and their whispered comments stung. But F refused to let their judgments deter her. She took notes diligently, stayed after class to ask questions, and practiced what she learned at home. One afternoon, as the class practiced cleaning techniques, Mama Grace approached F. "You remind me of myself," she said, her tone soft but firm. "I made mistakes too. Big ones. But I learned, and I rebuilt. You can do the same." F blinked back tears, nodding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. From that day on, Mama Grace became more than an instructor, she became a mentor. She encouraged F to volunteer at a community kitchen, where she worked under the supervision of seasoned chefs. The experience was humbling but rewarding. For the first time, F understood the pride that came with maintaining a clean, organized workspace. Months turned into a year, and F slowly began to rebuild her confidence. She earned her food safety certification, a piece of paper that felt heavier than its weight as she held it in her hands. It wasn't just a certificate, it was proof that she could change, that she could be better. With Mama Grace's guidance, F began planning her return. She saved what little money she had and scouted for a new location. This time, she was determined to do things right. The space she chose was smaller than her previous eatery, but it was clean and well lit, with enough room for an